It starts with a ping. A stranger accepts your ride. 5 stars, clean car, verified account. You check the plate number. It matches. The door unlocks. You get in. What could possibly go wrong? Tonight, we're diving into 10 Uber and Lyft murders that shattered the illusion of safety inside a simple rideshare. No warnings. No dramatic music. Just ordinary rides that turned into something unthinkable. And the first one begins with a man who thought he was just driving another late-night fare. Case 1. Clifford Stokes / Ahmad Yusufi, 2021. It was just another shift. Ahmad Yusufi had done this hundreds of times before. A rideshare driver navigating city streets, following GPS instructions, picking up strangers and dropping them off. The routine was predictable. Ping. Accept, drive, rate, repeat. Late one night in 2021, he accepted what appeared to be a normal ride request. The passenger's name, Clifford Stokes. There were no red flags in the app, no warnings, no history of violence attached to the profile. Just a pickup location and a destination. Ahmad pulled up. The passenger got in. At first, everything seemed normal. The small talk was minimal. That wasn't unusual. Many riders preferred silence. Ahmad focused on the road, while the navigation voice calmly dictated turns through dimly lit streets. But something shifted. It's impossible to pinpoint the exact second when a routine ride turns into a threat. Sometimes it's a tone change, a sudden movement, a silence that feels heavier than before. According to investigators, the atmosphere inside that vehicle changed rapidly. Stokes wasn't just a passenger, he had a weapon. What happened next unfolded quickly. There was no dramatic argument, no extended confrontation, just sudden violence inside a confined space where the driver had nowhere to run. Inside a moving car, the driver is at a disadvantage. Seatbelt locked, steering wheel in hand, focus forward, vulnerable from behind. That vulnerability was exploited. Ahmad Yusufi was attacked during the ride. The confined cabin turned into a trap. There was no time to escape, no safe shoulder to pull over and run. The vehicle itself became part of the crime scene. After the attack, the suspect fled. A rideshare vehicle that minutes earlier was just another car in traffic was now abandoned evidence. The randomness of it is what unsettled so many people who later learned about the case. There was no personal connection, no history between them, no long-standing conflict, just a driver fulfilling a ride request. When law enforcement pieced together the timeline, the chilling part wasn't complexity, it was simplicity. One man opened an app, another man accepted, and that was enough. Investigators moved quickly. Digital footprints are hard to erase in the rideshare world. Accounts are logged. Locations are tracked. Ride histories are stored. Every mile is recorded. Clifford Stokes was identified and arrested. But for Ahmad, the ride had already ended. The car that once represented opportunity, flexible hours, income, independence, had become the setting of a fatal decision made by someone he had never met before that night. Inside the rideshare industry, drivers often speak about trusting the app. The platform verifies riders. Thought payments are processed electronically. There's a sense of digital security. But digital security doesn't prevent physical violence inside a vehicle. And that's what makes this case so disturbing. It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't premeditated in some cinematic way. It was immediate, opportunistic, brutal. For millions of drivers watching the news afterward, the fear wasn't abstract. It was practical. What if the next ping isn't just a ride? What if the person getting into the back seat isn't who they appear to be? When you drive strangers for a living, every shift carries unknown variables. Most nights end safely. Most rides are uneventful. But it only takes one. One rider, one decision, one moment in a locked vehicle. And what makes this case particularly haunting is how ordinary it started. And there were no warning signs visible in the app. No dramatic chase, no public setting filled with witnesses. Just two people inside a car, one trusting, one armed. The illusion of control shattered in seconds. Because when you're driving, your eyes are on the road. And danger doesn't always sit in front of you. Sometimes it sits directly behind you. Case 2. Nathaniel Rowland/Samantha Josephson, 2019. It was supposed to be a normal Friday night. Columbia, South Carolina, March 2019. Samantha Josephson was 21 years old, a senior at the University of South Carolina, pre-law, driven, focused, the kind of student who had a future mapped out in careful detail. That night, she went out with friends to 5 Points, the city's busy nightlife district. Loud music, crowded sidewalks, flashing lights, and it was the kind of environment where everyone orders rides home at the same time. Close to 2 a.m., Samantha decided to head back to her apartment. She opened her Uber app, requested a ride, waited. The app showed her driver approaching. But in a crowded pickup zone filled with vehicles pulling up and pulling away, something subtle went wrong. A black Chevy Impala stopped near her. She got in. The problem? It wasn't her Uber. The driver wasn't the person listed in her app. Inside that car was 24-year-old Nathaniel Rowland. He was not a rideshare driver. He had not been dispatched by Uber. He had not been verified. But in the chaos of late-night traffic and flashing brake lights, Samantha entered the vehicle believing it was her ride. Security cameras later captured the moment she stepped inside. It looked ordinary. No struggle, no hesitation. Just a young woman climbing into what she believed was safe transportation. Once inside, everything changed. According to prosecutors, Rowland had child safety locks engaged. That meant once the doors closed, Samantha couldn't open them from the inside. The vehicle became a trap. Investigators would later reveal that she fought back. Inside that moving car, she resisted. But the physical imbalance was overwhelming. Hours later, Samantha's body was discovered in a wooded area in Clarendon County. Her phone was still in her hand. That detail struck people deeply. It suggested she may have been trying to call for help, trying to unlock something. Rowland was arrested the following day after police traced the vehicle and recovered physical evidence from inside the car. Blood. The cleaning supplies. Items linking him directly to the crime. The case moved quickly through the legal system. Surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and phone data built a tight timeline. But what shook millions of people wasn't just the crime. It was the simplicity of the mistake. She thought it was her Uber. That's it. In rideshare culture, there's a ritual. Check the plate, confirm the name, verify the driver. But in loud, crowded nightlife areas, split-second decisions happen. Cars look similar. Drivers pull up aggressively to claim passengers. People are distracted, and predators can exploit that confusion. Rowland wasn't a registered Uber driver, but he knew where to wait. He knew that young people leaving bars would be looking down at their phones, scanning for vehicles. He blended into the system. That's what made it terrifying. It wasn't a hacking scheme. It wasn't some elaborate digital manipulation. It was physical impersonation. A car, a curb, a moment of trust. For college students across the country, this case felt personal. Every weekend, millions of young adults do the same thing. Night out, open app, wait for car, go home. The routine feels safe because it's structured. But that structure depends on one critical step: verification. Inside Roland's vehicle, Samantha realized something was wrong. Prosecutors later described signs of struggle, defensive wounds, evidence she tried to fight. But once you're locked in a moving vehicle controlled by someone else, options shrink fast. You're no longer choosing the destination. You're no longer in control of the route. You're at the mercy of the driver. And in this case, the driver was never meant to be there at all. The psychological weight of this case lingers because it challenges a basic assumption. If I order it through an app, it must be safe. Technology gives the illusion of control. A map, a name, a rating, a driver photo. But if you enter the wrong car, even one that looks almost identical, none of that matters. The most haunting part is how normal the beginning was. A night out with friends, a plan to go home, a car pulling up. If you watch the surveillance footage, you wouldn't know what was about to happen. There's no dramatic cue, no ominous soundtrack, just a door opening and closing. For millions of riders, that door now represents something different. Not convenience, not independence, but risk. Only because the difference between safety and tragedy can be as small as one unchecked license plate. Case 3. Jason Dalton / Kalamazoo Spree, 2016. It was a Saturday evening in Kalamazoo, Michigan. February 20th. Snow lined the streets. Families were out shopping. Couples were finishing dinner. It was an ordinary Midwestern weekend. And somewhere in the city, a man was logged into the Uber app. Jason Dalton, 45 years old, father of 2, insurance adjuster by day, Uber driver by night. He had passed the background check. He had the app. He had a vehicle. He was actively accepting rides. What no one knew was that between those rides, Dalton was driving around the city looking for random victims. At approximately 5:42 p.m., Dalton approached an apartment complex. Without warning, he shot a woman multiple times while she was outside with her children. She survived. He drove away. Minutes later, he logged back into Uber and accepted another fare. Let that sink in. A passenger entered his vehicle, completely unaware that the driver had just opened fire on someone. Inside the car, Dalton acted normal. He followed the GPS. He completed the trip. He was calm. Later that evening, around 10 p.m., Dalton arrived at a car dealership parking lot. A father and son were looking at vehicles. Dalton pulled up, shot both of them, and drove away. Again, he continued accepting rides. Passengers later described bizarre behavior during their trips. One woman recalled him driving erratically at high speeds. When she confronted him, she demanded he stop the car and let her out. She called 911, but by then, Dalton had already moved on. Around 11 p.m., he approached a Cracker Barrel parking lot. Without any connection to the victims, without any confrontation, he opened fire again. 4 women were shot. 2 of them died. Combined with the earlier victims, the total death toll reached 6, with 2 survivors. Between these shootings, Dalton was still operating as an Uber driver. He was picking up riders, completing trips, receiving digital payments. At one point, police were actively searching for a suspect vehicle, a dark Chevy HHR. Meanwhile, unsuspecting passengers were sitting inside that exact vehicle. The chilling part isn't just that he was a driver. It's that he was actively using the platform during the spree. A rideshare app is built around ratings and trust. Dalton had a profile. He had a history of completed trips. He had passengers getting into his car based purely on the legitimacy of that profile. No one entering that vehicle could have imagined they were sharing space with an active killer. Investigators later discovered that Dalton's attacks appeared random. There was no personal link between him and the victims. No robbery. No clear motive rooted in revenge or dispute. Just selection, opportunity, proximity. At approximately 12:40 a.m., Dalton was arrested during a traffic stop. He was still driving the same vehicle. Inside were items connecting him to the shootings. In interrogation, Dalton reportedly gave fragmented explanations. At one point, he claimed the Uber app had taken over his mind, that it had directed him, that he felt controlled. Authorities found no evidence supporting that claim, but the idea itself added another layer of unease. Because this wasn't a disgruntled passenger. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was the driver. The person behind the wheel, the one responsible for getting you home safely, was the threat. For rideshare users, this case shattered a psychological barrier. Passengers often worry about getting into a stranger's car, but this was different. This wasn't about impersonation. This wasn't about fake accounts. This was a verified, background-checked driver committing random murders between fares. Imagine finishing a ride, rating your driver 5 stars, thanking him politely, and later discovering that minutes after dropping you off, he opened fire on someone else. That reality hit hard, because rideshare rides are intimate spaces. You're alone with someone, doors locked, windows up, under minimal oversight. You trust that the system filtered out danger. But background checks only show the past. They don't predict what someone might decide to do tonight. Dalton's case forced people to confront a terrifying truth. You can do everything right. Order through the app, confirm the plate, check the driver's name, sit in the back seat, and still be inside the car of someone capable of unimaginable violence. The randomness amplified the fear. He didn't target specific individuals. He targeted whoever happened to be there. That unpredictability made it impossible to rationalize. There was no pattern to avoid, no warning signs to memorize. Just a man behind a wheel, switching between normalcy and murder. 1 minute. How's your night going? The next. Gunshots in a parking lot. When people think about rideshare dangers, they often picture the passenger as the threat. This case flipped that narrative entirely. Sometimes, the person driving you isn't just taking you somewhere. Sometimes, they're on their way to something far darker. And if that wasn't disturbing enough. Case 4. Aaron Wilson Jr. / Uberpool double murder, 2019. Uberpool was designed to feel efficient. Cheaper fares, shared rides, strangers heading in the same direction. The app optimized routes, pairing passengers who didn't know each other but trusted the same system. 2 riders, 1 car, shared destination. On paper, it was safe, economical, smart. In 2019, that shared ride concept became the setting for something far more sinister. Aaron Wilson Jr. wasn't a driver. He was a passenger, and he ordered an Uberpool ride like millions of others had done before. The app paired him with another rider inside the same vehicle. A stranger. 2 people who had never met. The ride began normally. GPS directions. Casual silence. City lights passing by the windows. Uberpool rides often carry a strange dynamic. Brief, awkward proximity. You don't know the other person, but you share a confined space for several miles. There's an unspoken agreement. Mind your business. That night, that agreement collapsed. At some point during or after the ride, violence erupted. According to investigators, Aaron Wilson Jr. fatally shot the other passenger. The attack wasn't preceded by a long argument. It wasn't rooted in personal history. They were strangers brought together by an algorithm. Now, the randomness of the pairing became the randomness of the crime. Inside that vehicle, the victim likely had no reason to suspect danger. It was just a shared ride, a cheaper option. But ride-share pooling introduces a variable most people don't think about. You're not just trusting the driver. You're trusting whoever else the app places beside you. That additional layer of unpredictability changes the equation. In a private Uber ride, there are two people inside the car, driver and passenger. In Uber Pool, there are three, sometimes four, and every additional person is another unknown. When the attack occurred, chaos followed. Law enforcement responded quickly, tracing ride records and identifying those involved. Digital logs once again provided a timeline. But the setting itself is what left people unsettled, because Uber Pool had always been marketed as safe and community-driven. Riders could see the driver's profile. They could track the route. They could even see general information about the other passenger. But information doesn't equal intent. The victim, in this case, had done nothing more than request a ride home. He didn't know the man sitting next to him. He didn't choose him. The app did. That's what makes shared ride crimes psychologically heavier. You didn't select the risk. The system paired you with it. Investigators later built the case around witness accounts, forensic evidence, and ride data. Aaron Wilson Jr. was identified, arrested, and charged. But for riders who regularly selected Uber Pool to save a few dollars, the perception changed overnight. Suddenly, the back seat didn't feel neutral. It felt exposed. When in a shared ride, you can't control who gets in after you. You can't predict their mental state. You can't vet their intentions. You're relying entirely on the idea that strangers will behave predictably. Most of the time, they do. But most of the time, only works until it doesn't. And when violence happens inside a moving vehicle, the options shrink fast. You can't open the door easily at high speed. You can't safely intervene without escalating danger. You're trapped in a confined space with limited exits. The car becomes a box, a moving one. This case forced many riders to rethink the concept of pooled rides entirely. Saving money suddenly felt insignificant compared to safety. And the unsettling truth lingered. The app doesn't just connect you to a driver, and it connects you to whoever else taps confirm. And once that door closes, you're committed to the route. Case 5. Jorge Aponte Figueroa / Uber driver, 2017. For rideshare drivers, late nights are often the most profitable. Fewer cars on the road, surge pricing, airport runs, bar pickups, long-distance fares. But late nights also mean fewer witnesses. In 2017, Jorge Aponte Figueroa requested an Uber ride like thousands of others had done that evening. The driver who accepted the request had no reason to hesitate. The app displayed the pickup, the name, the route, standard procedure. The driver pulled up. Figueroa entered the vehicle. At first, nothing appeared unusual. No confrontation at the curb, no visible tension. Just another passenger in the back seat. But somewhere along the route, the ride turned violent. Details from court proceedings later revealed that the driver was attacked during the trip. What began as a normal fare became a fatal encounter inside the confined space of a moving vehicle. The suspect had a weapon. And once again, the driver was at a physical disadvantage. Driving requires focus. Hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Attention split between traffic, GPS, and road conditions. An attack from behind leaves almost no reaction time. Inside that car, there were no bystanders, no immediate intervention, just a driver and a passenger, one trusting the system, the other exploiting it. After the attack, the suspect fled. The vehicle was later located, but by then the damage had been done. Investigators quickly pieced together the digital trail. Rideshare platforms log everything: exact pickup coordinates, time-stamped trip acceptance, GPS route data, payment method. Unlike traditional taxi crimes decades ago, rideshare incidents leave a technological footprint. Jorge Aponte Figueroa was identified and arrested. But the story echoed a growing pattern. Drivers are screened before being allowed onto the platform. They provide identification, vehicle registration, background checks. Passengers, however, often provide far less verifiable information: an email address, a phone number, a debit card. That imbalance creates a structural vulnerability. Drivers open their doors to strangers who know their name, their vehicle, and their face, while the driver may only see a first name and a rating. In this case, the imbalance became deadly. There was no long argument recorded, no extended altercation caught on camera, just a ride that began normally and ended in violence. For drivers following the story, the fear wasn't abstract. It was procedural, because every shift begins the same way. You log in, you wait. You accept whoever the app sends. There's no interview process at the curb, no pre-screening conversation. You don't know if the rider is angry, desperate, armed. You only know the destination, and once they're in the back seat, you're committed to the route. The intimacy of rideshare driving is what makes these crimes so unsettling. You're inches away from someone you've never met. You share space for 10, 15, sometimes 40 minutes. In that time, anything can change. The financial model depends on trust. Drivers trust passengers not to harm them. Passengers trust drivers to deliver them safely. When that trust collapses, the entire experience feels different. In the aftermath of this case, many drivers described a heightened sense of alertness, checking mirrors more often, avoiding certain neighborhoods, ending shifts earlier. Because once you realize how quickly a routine ride can become a fatal encounter, the car no longer feels like neutral ground. It feels like exposure, and that exposure goes both ways. Case 6. Imran Ali Rashid / Isabella Lewis, 2021. Some rides don't begin late at night. Some don't involve crowded nightlife districts or high-risk neighborhoods. Some start in the middle of an ordinary day. In 2021, Isabella Lewis requested a rideshare like she had done before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reckless. It was routine. A ride from one location to another. Something millions of people rely on every single day. And the driver who accepted the request was Imran Ali Rashid. Verified account, active driver, logged into the system. The app confirmed the match. Pickup location locked in. Isabella got into the vehicle. At first, nothing about the ride appeared unusual. The doors closed. The car merged into traffic. GPS instructions guided the route. But something shifted during the trip. Investigators later revealed that Rashid deviated from the expected route. That detail is subtle, but critical. When you order a ride, you expect predictability, a straight line from point A to point B. Any detour creates uncertainty. Inside a moving car, that uncertainty can quickly become fear. According to case findings, the ride did not end at the intended destination. Instead, it ended in violence. And what makes this case particularly chilling is the dynamic of control inside a rideshare vehicle. The driver determines the route, the speed, the stops, the direction. The passenger relies on digital tracking and blind trust. But digital tracking doesn't physically stop a driver from turning onto a different road. Isabella Lewis was attacked during that ride. Inside the vehicle, away from witnesses, in a space where help was not immediately accessible. The investigation moved quickly. GPS logs, route data, and ride timestamps provided law enforcement with a detailed timeline. Surveillance cameras captured segments of the vehicle's movement. Digital records narrowed the window of events. Rashid was identified and arrested. But once again, the pattern was painfully familiar. The ride began normally. No visible warning signs, no obvious red flags in the app. Just a passenger placing trust in a driver approved by a system. The vulnerability inside a rideshare isn't always obvious until it's too late. You're seated in the back. You may not know the area. You might not immediately recognize a wrong turn. You're dependent on the person driving to follow the plan. And if that person chooses not to, your options shrink rapidly. In this case, the deviation wasn't just a wrong turn. It was a turning point. Investigators later emphasized how quickly the situation escalated once control shifted entirely to the driver. Inside a moving vehicle, escape is complicated. Opening a door at speed risks serious injury. Confronting the driver could escalate violence. The enclosed nature of the car transforms it into something else, a sealed environment. And when the driver becomes the threat, the imbalance is stark. Unlike impersonation cases where someone pretends to be a rideshare driver, this case involved a legitimate account holder. The system had verified him. Passengers would see his name, rating, and vehicle details. On the surface, everything appeared secure. But security protocols only assess past behavior. They don't predict future decisions. And sometimes, the danger isn't external. It's sitting in the driver's seat. For riders following this case, a new question emerged. How much control do you really have once the car starts moving? Yes, you can share your trip. Yes, you can monitor the route. Yes, you can message someone. But if the driver chooses to ignore the route entirely, you're reacting, not controlling. Isabella Lewis entered that car expecting transportation. She never reached her destination. The tragedy underscores a recurring truth across these cases. The rideshare vehicle feels private, but it's profoundly exposed. Two strangers, locked doors, moving at speed, limited intervention. The simplicity of it is what makes it heavy. You don't need elaborate planning to exploit that environment. Just intent. And a moment. The next case returns to the vulnerability of drivers once more, but with a confrontation that unfolded in seconds and ended before help could arrive. Case 7. Torian Wilson / Elijah Newman, 2021. For many drivers, the shift doesn't feel dangerous. It feels repetitive. You accept a ride, you follow the map, you make small talk or none at all. You drop the passenger off, then you do it again. In 2021, Elijah Newman was working a rideshare shift like countless others. Logged in, waiting for pings, watching the screen for the next request. A ride came through. The passenger, Torian Wilson. Nothing in the app suggested danger. No warnings, no visible red flags. Just a pickup location and a destination. Elijah accepted. He pulled up to the location. Wilson entered the vehicle. For drivers, that moment, the door opening, someone sliding into the back seat, is automatic. It happens dozens of times a week. You don't analyze it. You just continue the routine. But this ride wouldn't follow the routine. According to investigators, then the situation escalated rapidly during the trip. What began as transportation turned into confrontation. Inside a rideshare vehicle, disputes can feel magnified. A comment, a disagreement about route, a request to stop somewhere unexpected. When you're enclosed in a small space, tension doesn't dissipate, it concentrates. Somewhere along the ride, violence erupted. Elijah Newman was shot, inside his own vehicle, behind the wheel. The suddenness of it is what left investigators and fellow drivers shaken. There was no prolonged buildup, no extended argument recorded beforehand. Just a split-second shift from routine to fatal. After the shooting, the suspect fled the scene. But as with other rideshare-related crimes, digital evidence became central. Ride logs, GPS tracking, and phone records narrowed the suspect list quickly. Notorian Wilson was identified and arrested. For drivers following the case, one detail stood out. There had been no prior relationship, no history between driver and passenger, just an app connection. That's the thread running through so many of these cases. The app acts as the bridge. It introduces strangers. It creates temporary partnerships. It establishes trust. But once the ride begins, the app isn't physically present. It doesn't sit between the seats. It doesn't intervene. Drivers often describe rideshare work as being alone, but not alone. You're in public spaces, driving through busy streets. Yet inside the vehicle, it's just you and whoever sits behind you. If something happens, it happens fast. And response times matter. In this case, help couldn't arrive in time, or the psychological weight of driver-targeted crimes hits differently than passenger-targeted ones. Passengers fear getting into the wrong car. Drivers fear letting the wrong person in. Every ride begins with a choice: accept or decline. But drivers can't profile passengers beyond a name and rating. They can't see a full background report. They can't assess intent from a screen. The trust is asymmetrical. Passengers see the driver's photo, vehicle type, star rating, trip count. Drivers see a first name. That imbalance creates vulnerability. Elijah Newman's shift began like any other. There was no sense that this particular request would be different. No intuition warning him. Just another ride. The violence inside the vehicle reminds us how thin the barrier is between normalcy and tragedy in rideshare work. Because once a passenger is seated behind you, you're focused on traffic. Your back is turned. Your hands are committed to steering. You're responsible for safe navigation, while someone else controls what happens in the rear seat. And if that person decides to act violently, the reaction window is almost non-existent. This case reinforced a painful reality for drivers. You are physically exposed every time you unlock the door. And exposure doesn't require high crime areas or dramatic circumstances. It can happen in ordinary neighborhoods, on ordinary nights, during ordinary rides. Case 8, Trevor Powell/Jaquez Moore, 2020. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. Jaquez Moore requested a ride like millions of others had during 2020. The world was tense that year. Pandemics, shutdowns, uncertainty. But rideshare apps were still moving people from place to place. Normal life, fragmented but still functioning. The driver accepted. Trevor Powell, verified account, active driver, logged in and operating. The match appeared in the app. Pickup confirmed. Moore entered the vehicle. At first, nothing about the ride stood out. The GPS loaded. The car pulled away from the curb. Another transaction in the digital economy of strangers. But something inside that vehicle shifted. Investigators later revealed that an argument broke out during the ride. The exact trigger wasn't dramatic. Disagreements in ride shares can happen over route changes, payment issues, wait times, or simple misunderstandings. Inside a moving car, small tensions feel amplified. You can't create space. You can't step away. You're confined. So according to reports, the disagreement escalated quickly. Voices raised, tension sharpened. And then, Violence. Jacques Moore was shot inside the rideshare vehicle. The argument had crossed an invisible line. After the shooting, Powell fled. But like so many rideshare-related crimes, the digital paper trail was immediate. The platform had recorded the ride, the timestamp, the pickup, the driver identity. Law enforcement traced the account. Trevor Powell was identified and arrested. The disturbing element in this case isn't elaborate planning, it's escalation. Because rideshare environments are fragile ecosystems. Two strangers, no prior relationship, different expectations. When communication breaks down inside that confined space, outcomes can spiral fast. There's no buffer, no crowd, no mediator, just direct confrontation. For passengers, there's an assumption that drivers are professionals, that disagreements will remain verbal, that worst-case scenarios involve a bad rating or a complaint. But when the person controlling the vehicle also controls a weapon, the power dynamic changes instantly. You're not arguing with someone across a counter. You're arguing with someone driving you at 40 miles per hour. And if they decide to stop the car in an isolated area, you're dependent on their choices. In this case, the conflict didn't resolve. It detonated. The tragedy underscores a critical reality of rideshare interactions. They feel casual, but they're intense. You're sharing close physical proximity with someone you don't know. Personal space is reduced. Emotions are exposed. There's little time to de-escalate. What might have been a minor dispute in a public place can feel confrontational inside a moving vehicle. For many riders who followed the case, a new anxiety surfaced. What happens if your driver becomes angry? What if you question the route? What if there's a misunderstanding? Most rides end peacefully, but the confined setting makes volatility dangerous. Jacques Moore entered the car expecting transportation. He didn't expect a confrontation. He didn't expect that a simple ride request would become fatal. And that unpredictability is what continues to haunt rideshare users. Because the app doesn't measure temperament. It doesn't predict who might escalate under stress. It verifies identity. It processes payments. It tracks routes. But it cannot guarantee emotional stability in every driver or passenger. Case 9. Mitchell and Peake/Brandon Cooper. Not every rideshare tragedy begins with a stranger climbing into the back seat. Sometimes, the danger waits at the destination. Brandon Cooper ordered a ride like so many others had. The app connected him with a driver. The pickup went smoothly. No tension. No visible signs that anything was wrong. The car pulled away from the curb. Traffic flowed normally. If you had passed them on the road, you would have seen nothing unusual. Just another vehicle blending into the city's movement. But what happened after that ride ended would turn a routine trip into a crime scene. Mitchell and Peake's weren't random names pulled from nowhere. They were connected to what unfolded next. When the vehicle arrived at or near its intended drop-off location, the situation escalated. Details revealed that after the ride concluded, violence erupted involving Brandon Cooper and individuals waiting at the destination. What makes this case particularly unsettling is how thin the boundary is between a safe drop-off and a dangerous encounter. For passengers, the ride itself often feels like the risk. But sometimes, the final few moments, stepping out of the car, standing on the curb, waiting for someone, can be just as vulnerable. According to investigators, Cooper was confronted shortly after exiting the rideshare vehicle. The confrontation turned violent. Gunfire, chaos. A routine ride transformed into a fatal event in seconds. The driver, who had simply completed the trip, suddenly found themselves in the middle of something far beyond transportation. Rideshare vehicles often arrive at private residences, apartment complexes, unfamiliar streets. Drivers don't know the dynamics of the location. Passengers may not know who else is present when they arrive. The app confirms a destination. It doesn't confirm what's waiting there. In this case, Mitchell and Peaks were tied to the violence that followed Cooper's arrival. The ride itself wasn't the confrontation. It was the moment immediately after. That subtle distinction is important, because many people assume danger happens inside the car. But rideshare trips blur boundaries between private and public spaces. You're dropped off in unfamiliar environments, sometimes in dim lighting, sometimes late at night, sometimes where tensions already exist. The rideshare driver isn't security, they're transportation, and once the door opens, and the protective illusion of the vehicle disappears. Brandon Cooper stepped out of the car, expecting to continue his night. Instead, he walked into a fatal encounter. For drivers following this case, another anxiety surfaced. What if the destination itself is unsafe? Drivers can decline rides based on distance or rating, but they can't see the social context of the drop-off point. They don't know if there's an ongoing dispute at that address. They don't know if someone is waiting with intent. They simply follow the route, and when violence erupts at the destination, the driver is often just feet away, close enough to hear it, close enough to see it, close enough to be part of the immediate aftermath. This case added a new layer to rideshare fears. The danger doesn't always ride with you. Sometimes it waits at the curb. The next and final case, however, returns to the most haunting scenario of all. A passenger who believed they were stepping into safety. But the ride itself would become the last journey they ever took. Case 10. Francisco Valadez/Chanti Dixon, 2024. Some rides don't make national headlines immediately. They unfold quietly. One city, one family, one notification that never comes. In 2024, Chanti Dixon requested a rideshare like she had done before. It wasn't a reckless decision. It wasn't unusual. It was transportation. Efficient, app-based, modern. She opened her phone, selected her destination, confirmed the pickup. The driver matched with her request was Francisco Valadez. Verified account. Active driver. No visible red alerts inside the app. Owner the car arrived. She got in. That's how almost every case on this list begins. Routine, ordinary, unremarkable. The vehicle merged into traffic. GPS guided the route. The ride progressed. But somewhere during that trip, something shifted. According to investigators, the journey did not end as planned. The driver deviated from expectations. Communication inside the car changed. What began as transportation became isolation. Inside a rideshare vehicle, once the door closes and the car is moving, control belongs to the driver. Passengers can track the route. They can text. They can share their location. But physically, they are inside a machine controlled by someone else. In this case, that control was abused. Chanti Dixon was attacked during or shortly after the ride. The investigation moved fast. Ride logs, route tracking, and vehicle identification narrowed the timeline quickly. Law enforcement located the suspect and made an arrest. Francisco Valadez was charged. But like the others on this list, the details that haunt people aren't complex. They're simple. She ordered a ride. She got in. She expected to arrive. She didn't. That's the through line across all 10 cases. No elaborate planning visible to the victim. No prior relationship. Just trust in a system built on convenience. Rideshare platforms operate on speed. A few taps. A car in minutes. The model depends on reducing friction. No cash exchanges, no negotiations, no dispatchers. But reducing friction also reduces pause. And sometimes pause is what keeps people safe. Across these 10 cases, the patterns repeat. Drivers attacked by passengers. Passengers attacked by drivers. And impersonators waiting at curbs. Shared rides pairing strangers. Violence at destinations. Drivers committing crimes between trips. Different cities. Different names. Same structure. 2 strangers. 1 vehicle. Locked doors. Limited escape. Technology connects them. Human intent decides the outcome. And that's the uncomfortable truth. The app can verify identity. It can run background checks. It can record routes and timestamps. But it cannot measure what someone is willing to do in the next 5 minutes. It cannot predict escalation. It cannot stop a sudden decision made inside a moving car. For millions of people, ride-share apps represent freedom. No need for parking. No need for designated drivers. No waiting on taxis. Just convenience. But convenience is built on trust. And trust, once broken, lingers. Each of these 10 cases forced riders and drivers to confront the same question. How well do you really know the person inside that car? When you sit in the back seat, you're placing your safety in the hands of someone you met seconds ago. When you unlock the door as a driver, you're inviting someone into your personal space with almost no screening. The vehicle becomes a shared vulnerability. And vulnerability, when exploited, leaves permanent damage. 10 rides. 10 tragedies. 10 reminders that the illusion of safety can dissolve in an instant. The next time you hear that familiar ping, the next time headlights pull up to the curb, the next time a door unlocks and you slide into the back seat. You might remember these stories, and you might pause. Because sometimes the most dangerous place isn't a dark alley. It isn't an abandoned building. It isn't a deserted highway. Sometimes it's the back seat of a car you ordered yourself.